The day her marriage was officially dissolved, Amara found herself checking into a dusty roadside lodge with her baby, completely unaware that the man in the next room was a solitary millionaire. In the cold, humming fluorescent glare of the magistrate's court passage, she stood perfectly still, her arms a tight shield around her infant daughter. Her former husband, leaning against the peeling wall in a sharp suit, spoke in a low voice thick with disdain. "You won't survive a week out there alone with that child. Don't come crawling back when the world breaks you, Amara." She offered no reply. She refused to grant him a glance. She simply drew her daughter closer, the thin cotton blanket a poor defense against the chill in the air and the ice in his words. She walked away from him with her head held high, her breathing ragged. He made no move to follow. He didn't need to, his voice clung to her long after she stepped outside. A sudden downpour met her like a physical blow, heavy and relentless. She huddled under a rusted tin awning in the nearly empty car park, her thin shoes soaked through, her jeans clinging cold and heavy to her legs. The baby began to whimper, her small cries swallowed by the wind. There was no car, no home, and no one she could call. Her phone's battery was dead, but even if it were charged, there wasn't a single name worth dialing. 5 years of being told what to think, what to wear, how to make herself small enough to go unnoticed. He had never laid a hand on her, but the wounds he inflicted were quieter, and they ran much deeper. All that remained now was a profound silence, a baby, and the drumming of the rain. With the last of the cash in her wallet, Amara hailed a minibus taxi and asked the driver to take her somewhere cheap, somewhere safe. 20 minutes later, she was dropped off in front of a tired-looking guesthouse just off the main road, the Jacaranda Lodge. Its neon sign sputtered erratically, bathing the cracked pavement in a sickly purple light. Room 6A was all she could manage for 3 nights. The room carried the faint scent of damp and stale cigarette smoke. The walls were stained and peeling, the tiled floor uneven and cold to the touch. The old fan heater groaned as if annoyed at being switched on. A single, dim lamp on the nightstand flickered. The blanket on the bed was threadbare, the sheets a pale, worn-out yellow. A brown water stain spread across the ceiling, shaped uncannily like a hand. It was a far cry from a home, but it had 4 walls and a door that locked. Amara placed the baby gently on the bed before sinking down beside her. Her arms felt numb, her feet throbbed, and her mind refused to consider the reality of tomorrow. That night, as she sat unmoving in the darkness, listening to the soft rhythm of her daughter's breathing deepen into a gentle snore, she heard it. A soft tapping sound, 3 distinct knocks, coming from the wall behind her bed, the one she shared with the room next door. She went rigid, holding her breath. Silence followed, broken only by the hum of the old heater. Perhaps it was just a pipe. Maybe someone had dropped something. Or maybe she had imagined it. She pulled the thin blanket more securely around her daughter and laid down. The next night, it happened again. 3 soft, deliberate taps. Amara sat bolt upright. This time, she didn't second-guess it. She reached out a hand and gently tapped back 3 times. She couldn't say why she did it. Maybe it was an act of defiance. Maybe it was a flicker of hope. Or maybe she just needed to know that someone, anyone, was there. And on the other side of that thin, aging wall, someone was. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, Amara stepped out of her room. She cradled a small bag of rubbish in one hand while balancing her baby against her shoulder with the other. The morning chill bit through her thin jersey, and the ground was still damp from the night's rain. As she bent to place the bag beside the rusted bin, something caught her attention. A neatly folded piece of paper was tucked securely under her doorframe. She paused. It was clean and dry, placed with an intention to be found. With slow fingers, Amara picked it up, her heart already beating a little too fast. She unfolded the note and read the message written in a strong, steady hand. Asterisk, if you ever need anything, just knock 3 times again. Room 6B star. She stared at the words for a long moment, her lips parted as if to form a question that wouldn't come. She glanced at the door to the next room, 6B. It was closed, the curtains drawn, appearing utterly silent. Whoever was in there had heard her. Amara read the note over and over, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket. She did not respond. That night, the baby started to cry. It began as a soft whimper and escalated into a wail. Her little cheeks were flushed, and her body radiated a worrying heat. Amara touched her forehead and felt the undeniable warmth of a fever. Panic rose in her throat like bile. She frantically searched her bag. No infant paracetamol, no thermometer, no formula. She had used the last of it the night before. There was no shop nearby, no car to get to one, and the lodge reception had closed hours ago. The baby's cries grew louder. Amara's hands began to tremble. She wrapped her daughter more tightly in the blanket and rocked her, humming lullabies with a voice that kept breaking. And then, she remembered the note. Her eyes shot to the wall. Her breath hitched. She reached out slowly and knocked. 3 soft, deliberate taps on the plasterboard. Her hand lingered there for a moment, palm pressed flat against the faded paint. Then she pulled back, holding her baby close, trying to soothe the sobs in her own chest as much as the ones in her arms. An hour crawled by. Then she heard a quiet rustle at her door. Amara opened it. On the ground sat a small tin of infant formula, sealed and new. Beside it, 2 single-dose sachets of baby fever medicine were arranged neatly. There was no note, no voice, no sound of footsteps fading away. Just the cold night air and the sound of her child's breathing finally beginning to soften against her chest. Amara looked down at the supplies, then back at the silent door of room 6B. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a very long time, they were not tears of fear or shame. They were the tears of someone who had finally been heard. A harsh winter frost had settled overnight, coating the ground in a fine white layer that crunched under Amara's shoes as she stepped into the lodge's dusty back courtyard. The morning sun had finally returned, a weak but golden presence, melting the ice along the edges of the patchy grass. Amara held her daughter close, the baby bundled snugly in a woolen blanket, her tiny head peeking out with wide, curious eyes. She walked slowly, more to feel the fresh air on her skin than to go anywhere in particular. The courtyard was quiet, framed by leafless thorn trees and old picnic tables. Then, under a stark acacia tree in the corner, Amara saw someone sitting alone. A man. He was dressed in a thick gray jersey, dark jeans, and boots dusted with frost. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and he sat with one leg crossed over the other, a book open in his hands. Despite the cold, he appeared peaceful, maybe weary, but composed in a way that felt still and certain. Amara hesitated, then gave a polite nod as she walked past him. He looked up and offered a faint smile. "Beautiful morning," he said, his voice deep and calm. She returned the smile, cautious but polite. "Yes, finally. My daughter was getting tired of the walls." He glanced at the baby, who blinked back at him with sleepy curiosity. He tilted his head slightly and smiled again, a warmer expression this time. "She has bright eyes," he said softly. "She looks like she believes the world is still good." Amara blinked, taken aback by the gentleness in his tone. It wasn't flirtation, nor was it pity. It was simple kindness. A comment that saw her child as a person, not a liability. Not once in the last 5 years had a man spoken with such softness. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly at a loss for what else to say. "I'm Kofi," he offered, closing his book gently on his lap. "Amara," she replied. They exchanged a few more words, about the cold, the quiet, the lodge's temperamental plumbing, and then parted ways naturally, like 2 strangers who had simply shared a moment. Neither asked where the other was staying, and neither realized they were living just one thin wall apart. A few days later, as the frost began to thaw and the air turned crisp, Amara carried her daughter across the courtyard again. The baby was fussing, upset by the chill or hunger or the general confusion of her new world. Amara juggled the nappy bag and blanket as best she could, but in the small chaos, one of the baby's tiny knitted booties fell to the ground. She didn't notice, but Kofi did. He had just stepped out from the tuck shop corner with a bottle of water when he saw it. Quietly, without calling out, he crossed the space between them. Amara was still rocking the baby, whispering soothing words. Kofi bent down, picked up the fallen booty, and approached her gently. "Excuse me," he said softly. Amara turned, surprised. He held out the booty with one hand, then carefully slipped it back over the baby's tiny foot with the other. "Can't have her catching a cold," he said with a quiet smile. Amara stood still, staring at him. It was such a small gesture, simple, thoughtful, effortless, but it struck her with an unexpected force. Her throat tightened, and her eyes stung. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. From the reception office window, the elderly manager, Mama Ngozi, had watched the exchange through her lace curtain. Later, as Amara passed the front desk to warm a bottle, the older woman looked up from her crossword puzzle and said gently, "Not many men notice such small things, my child. When they do, you remember." Later that evening, after her daughter had fallen asleep with a full tummy and a low-grade fever that had finally broken, Amara sat on the edge of the motel bed, her arms wrapped loosely around her knees. The tiny room felt larger than usual, cavernous in its quiet. The single dim lamp hummed softly, casting a pale halo of light over the bedspread, while the heater in the corner let out tired groans as it sputtered to life and then fell silent again. The walls, thin and aging, seemed to carry the echoes of years past, of whispered conversations, broken dreams, and perhaps even a few small miracles. Her gaze drifted to the wall on her right. The one that connected her room, 6A, to room 6B. The same wall she had knocked on, the same one that had answered. She stared at it for a long time, her heartbeat slowing. Then, quietly, she reached for the small notepad and pen she had found tucked inside the nightstand drawer days ago. The pages were yellowed at the edges, the ink in the pen barely flowing, but it would have to do. Amara stared at the blank sheet for nearly a full minute, her pen hovering. She didn't know what she expected. She wasn't writing for answers. She wasn't seeking comfort. She simply needed to say something, anything. Finally, with shaky fingers, she wrote, "Thank you for the milk, for the medicine, for not asking questions." That was all she could manage. She folded the note neatly, slipped into her jacket, and opened her door as quietly as possible. The passageway was empty, lit only by a flickering overhead light. She crossed the short distance to room 6B and gently pushed the folded paper under the door, letting it rest where she had found the original message. Then she returned to her room and sat in the dark. Did it say too much? Did it say too little? Did it even matter? She fell asleep holding her daughter close, with the faint hope that the knock she had answered would not be the last. The next morning, when she opened her door to get a juice from the vending machine down the hall, she nearly stepped on it. Another note, folded cleanly, placed directly in the center of her doormat. She unfolded it slowly, her breath caught in her throat. "I once knew a baby who used to smile like that, too. His name was Jelani." Amara read it again, and then a third time. The handwriting was familiar now, confident, even when conveying something so vulnerable. There was a weight in the simplicity of the sentence, an ocean of unspoken grief beneath the name. She glanced toward room 6B. The curtains were drawn. No sound, no movement. For a long moment, she considered knocking. Instead, that night, she wrote again. "My husband didn't hit me. He didn't have to. I wasn't allowed to wear bright colors. He didn't like it when I smiled too much. He counted the eggs in the fridge. I forgot who I was." She stared at the paper when she finished, torn between relief and fear. Her hands shook slightly. She almost tore it up, but instead, she folded it carefully and, just before midnight, slid it beneath his door. The reply came the following afternoon. She found it waiting near her door, just as before. My brother raised Jelani alone. I was always working, building a company, trying to be somebody. He asked me to visit one weekend, to help him look at a new house near a dam. I told him I was too busy. They were in a car accident on the way to that house. I never saw them again. Amara read the words sitting on the steps outside her room, her daughter asleep in her arms, her little body warm and still. The ache that bloomed in Amara's chest wasn't pity. It was recognition, the pain of what-ifs, of silence, of being too late. Each note that followed came more easily and yet cut deeper, like peeling away the layers of skin that had formed to protect wounds that had never truly healed. Kofi wrote, I used to think I needed to disappear to punish myself. Maybe I still do, Amara replied. I used to think if I stayed small enough, I'd finally be safe. They never signed the notes. They never asked personal questions. No, what do you do, or, where are you from? They didn't need those details. What mattered had already been said. Every morning, Amara would see Kofi under the bare acacia tree in the courtyard, reading a book with one hand in his pocket, the other flipping pages slowly. Every afternoon, they would nod to each other, sometimes offering a few light words. He made her laugh once with a dry joke about the lodge's questionable coffee. She saw him smile back, faint and genuine. They both felt something shift, but neither knew the truth. They didn't know that the words that lived in folded pieces of paper beneath their doors came from the same hands that passed each other juice bottles and laundry baskets in the hallway. But even though they didn't know, the wall between them was already beginning to disappear. The wind howled outside like a wounded animal, rattling the windowpanes of room 6A. Icy rain pelted sideways against the glass, and the old heater had gone silent hours ago. The entire lodge had lost power not long after dusk. No light, no heat, only the chill creeping in beneath the cracks of the door and windows. Amara wrapped her daughter in 2 layers of blankets and held her close against her chest. The baby's breathing was soft and steady, her tiny fingers curled into the fabric of Amara's jersey. The darkness pressed in thickly from every side. Amara reached for the emergency candle she had found in the nightstand drawer the day she checked in. It was short and stubby, the wax uneven from years of neglect. She lit it and placed it near the base of the wall that separated her from room 6B. The flame flickered, casting long, trembling shadows against the peeling wallpaper. She sat beside it, rocking her daughter gently, her eyes fixed on the candlelight, unsure why she placed it there, only that it felt right, a kind of offering, a signal, a prayer. And then it happened. From beneath the wall, just inches away from her candle's soft glow, another light appeared. A second candle. Its flame wavered and danced beside hers, separated only by drywall and paint. Amara stared. No words, no knocks, no notes. Just 2 small flames in the silence of a frozen night, leaning toward each other across a barrier too thin to hold back warmth. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She whispered into the quiet, more to herself than to anyone else, maybe he doesn't even know he's saving us. She felt her daughter stir in her arms, then settle again. The little one's body was warm against hers, comforted maybe by the soft glow, the calm in her mother's heartbeat. Time passed slowly. The wind outside still screamed, but inside, the 2 lights burned steady. Amara sat with her back against the bed, the candle between her and the wall, and imagined the man on the other side. Was he sitting just like her, alone, watching the flame? Did he wonder if she had seen his light, too? She pressed her fingers gently to the wall, flat against the spot where the 2 candles nearly touched. No sound came back, but something did, a presence, a closeness stronger than any voice, more intimate than any touch. For a moment, the lodge was not just a cheap room with paper-thin walls and a leaky ceiling. For a moment, it was a home. Not because it was warm or bright or filled with furniture, but because someone else was there, someone who understood. 2 strangers, separated by plaster and time and pain, sat inches apart in the dark, with only candlelight and silence between them. And in that silence, something unspoken passed through. Not rescue, not romance, just the unmistakable truth: you are not alone. The scream pierced the silence of the night like a jagged blade. Amara jolted upright in the darkness, her heart racing. Her daughter writhed in her arms, her skin hot and blotchy, her breaths shallow and fast. The room was suffocatingly quiet, save for the baby's distressed gasps. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Sweetheart, it's okay. It's okay, Mama's here," Amara whispered, trying to keep the panic from her voice. But the child's face had turned pale, her lips tinged with blue. She was burning up, yet her tiny limbs trembled with chills. Amara grabbed the thermometer, its battery was dead. She reached for her phone, it was lifeless. No car, no way to call for help. Without thinking, Amara rushed to the wall, dropped to her knees, and pounded. 3 knocks. Then again, harder, desperate, and again. "Please," she thought. "Please hear me." Moments later, the door to room 6B swung open. Kofi appeared barefoot, his jersey half-zipped, his eyes wide with alarm. He took one look at the baby in her arms, then met Amara's terrified gaze. He didn't ask a single question. "Come on," he said. They ran through the icy night, the frost crunching beneath their feet. Kofi's 4x4 was already warming up, he must have left it running, always prepared. He opened the passenger door and helped Amara climb in, then jumped into the driver's seat, tires screeching as they pulled out onto the empty road. Amara held her daughter close, her body trembling as she whispered to the baby, "Stay with me. Stay with me." Kofi's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his knuckles white around the wheel. Then he reached for his phone and tapped a number from memory. "Tabo, it's Kofi. I need your help now. It's a baby. No medical aid. I'm bringing her in." He paused, listening. "Yes." 10 minutes out, he ended the call. Amara stared at him, barely processing. Who is Tabo?" Her breath caught. "My doctor." "You have a private doctor?" He didn't look at her. "It's complicated." Minutes later, they skidded to a stop in front of a sleek, unfamiliar building, quiet, pristine, with a well-lit sign that read, "Private Medical Pavilion." Before Amara could say anything, the front doors opened and 2 nurses rushed out with a stretcher. No questions, no paperwork. They took the baby from her gently, quickly. Amara followed, barefoot and frantic, into a warm, sterile hallway where medical staff moved with silent precision. Inside the pediatric room, monitors beeped. A soft blue light cast over her daughter's face. "Oxygen. And 4. A calm, focused voice explained everything. "Fever spike. Possible RSV. We've stabilized her." Amara slumped into a chair, relief flooding through her like a dam breaking. Her body shook. Outside in the corridor, Kofi stood with his hands in his pockets, his head bowed slightly. She stepped out quietly, closing the door behind her. He did not turn. "Kofi," she said. He looked up. "Who are you?" she asked. Not accusing, not afraid, just needing to understand. His expression softened. "I'm just someone who once lost a child he loved. I won't let it happen again." They stood in silence. Later, after the baby had fallen into a calm, fever-free sleep, Amara found Kofi sitting in the waiting area, staring blankly at the floor. She sat beside him. After a while, he began to speak. "My brother's name was Kwame. He was a single dad. A good one, too. He used to say the only dream he had left was to raise his son near a dam, somewhere quiet, safe." Amara listened, still. "I promised I'd buy them the house. We were signing the deal that week, but I cancelled, postponed. Something about a meeting with investors. He never made it to the property. The car crash killed him instantly." He swallowed hard. "His son, Jelani, died 3 days later. Amara's hand slowly reached over, resting on his. Kofi didn't move. I had all the money, all the success, and it meant nothing when I couldn't save them, his voice cracked. So I sold my shares, walked away. I've been wandering, looking for someone I could help. Someone who might still have a chance. Amara gripped his hand tighter. You did save someone, she said softly. He finally looked at her. Really looked. Not as the woman next door, not as the mother in crisis, but as someone who had lost, just like he had, and somehow found her way through. Neither of them said another word. They sat in silence, side by side, their hands still joined. In the stillness of that hospital corridor, something shifted. A wound that had been bleeding quietly for years finally began to close, not with grand gestures, but with a single quiet moment, and a hand that chose not to let go. A week had passed since that night at the clinic. Yet Amara could still feel its weight, like a dream that had pressed too deeply into her chest. Her daughter had recovered, smiling and cooing again as if nothing had happened. But something had changed, in Amara, in Kofi, in the way they looked at each other, in the quiet they shared. On a crisp afternoon, Kofi pulled up in his 4x4 and asked gently, "Would you go somewhere with me?" Just a short drive. Amara hesitated, then nodded. The road curved gently through acacia trees and fields touched with early spring. They said little during the drive, the silence comfortable, not awkward. After about 30 minutes, Kofi turned onto a gravel path, tires crunching beneath them. Ahead stood a small 2-story cottage nestled at the edge of a peaceful dam. The house was made of old timber, the paint faded but not peeling, the porch long and welcoming, kissed by sunlight. Wind chimes swayed lazily in the breeze. The reflection of the clouds rippled across the surface of the water. Amara stepped out slowly, her daughter in her arms. The little girl squealed with joy and wriggled free to toddle through the yard, her giggles echoing across the open space. Amara stood frozen, her eyes taking in the beauty, the quiet, the stillness. It's beautiful, she whispered. Kofi stood a few feet away, his hands in his coat pockets. It was my brother's dream house. He never got to live here. It's been sitting empty since. Amara turned to him, her brows furrowing. Why did you bring me here? Kofi hesitated, then spoke softly. Because I think you would have wanted this house to mean something to someone. She shook her head. This is too much. I can't accept this. I don't want to be anyone's burden. You're not, he said gently but firmly. She looked away. I'm not offering you this out of pity, Kofi added. I made a promise to Kwame that I would find someone who needed what he wanted to give, a safe place, not just shelter. He reached into his coat and pulled out a weathered photograph. In it, Kwame stood in front of the very same house, holding a laughing little boy on his shoulders. The siding was still broken back then, the grass wild and uncut, but Kwame's face was full of hope. He wanted this place to be a home for someone who needed safety. I promised him I'd find that someone. Amara stared at the photo, her fingers trembling. The child in the picture had eyes like Kofi's. He continued, you and your daughter, you don't need saving. You just need space to breathe again. Tears pooled in Amara's eyes, but she blinked them away. She nodded slowly. Can I think about it? Kofi smiled. Of course. Take all the time you need. Over the following days, Amara returned to the lodge but found herself driving out to the dam again, once, then twice, then almost daily. Kofi never pressured her, but he was always there, fixing a leaky faucet, repainting a door frame, planting new flowers along the walkway. One morning, there were fresh felt flowers in a glass jar on the kitchen counter. One afternoon, he was in the garden showing her daughter how to pat soil around a young tomato plant. He stayed for dinners sometimes, quiet ones filled with shared glances and small smiles. They never kissed, never spoke of love. But it grew anyway, in glances across a kitchen table, in matching cups of coffee, in books read side by side without needing to speak. One evening, As the sun dipped low and painted the dam in gold, Amara stood barefoot on the porch, her daughter asleep inside. Kofi sat nearby, a cup of tea in hand. Amara turned to him and said, "It doesn't feel like I moved in." He looked at her, eyebrows raised gently. "It feels like I finally came home." Kofi held her gaze, the corners of his mouth lifting into a quiet smile. "That's all I ever wanted," he said softly, "for someone to feel safe again." The early spring sun filtered gently through the trees that surrounded the small lakeside cottage. Golden light danced across the wooden floorboards, warm and quiet, carrying the scent of dew and earth. Birds called softly from the branches, their songs blending with the sound of the kettle starting to boil in the kitchen. Amara stood at the stove, her dark hair loosely tied, a few strands falling into her face as she poured coffee into two mismatched mugs. The light touched her skin, softening the edges that had once been etched with exhaustion. She no longer looked like a woman hiding from the world. She looked like someone who had survived it. On the floor, her daughter giggled, stacking wooden blocks into a wobbly tower, then knocking them over with a shriek of delight. Her laughter filled the air, clean and carefree. The front door creaked open. Kofi stepped inside, his boots tracking faint prints of earth and grass. He carried a bundle of wildflowers, yellow, white, and violet, freshly picked from the edge of the dam. "Morning," he said with a smile, setting the flowers gently on the table. Amara smiled back, warm and easy. There was no awkwardness between them now, no hesitation. Only something simple, something steady. "I brought company," Kofi added, glancing down. The little girl looked up and squealed with recognition. She crawled quickly toward him, grabbing his leg and giggling. Kofi knelt, scooped her into his arms, and settled her on his hip like it was the most natural thing in the world. She rested her head against his chest, content and drowsy. Behind them on the windowsill sat two small candles, thin, simple, and half-melted. Amara noticed Kofi glance at them. "I never blew them out," she said quietly. "They've been burning inside me ever since that night." Kofi stared at the candles for a moment, his throat tightening. He smiled gently. "I guess it's time we let them light something bigger now." Later that afternoon, they sat together on a blanket spread over the grassy field behind the house. The dam shimmered in the distance, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead. The little girl slept in Amara's lap, her tiny hand curled against her mother's jersey. Kofi reclined beside them, a book open in one hand, the other arm resting around Amara's shoulders. They did not speak much. They did not need to. There was peace in the silence, a language made of shared breath and steady hearts. After a while, Amara broke the quiet. "We didn't fall in love, did we?" Kofi looked at her, his eyes gentle. "No," he said. "We grew into it, like a tree." Slow but strong, Amara leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes half closed. They sat like that for a long time, until the light began to fade and the shadows lengthened around them. Kofi glanced toward the house, its windows glowing softly from within. "Sometimes," he said, almost to himself, "all it takes is one knock on the wall, and everything begins again." If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the quiet strength and healing, or simply made you believe in the power of human connection again, then you're in the right place. At Soul-Stirring Stories, we share powerful emotional tales like this one. Stories that remind us that even through pain, love can grow. And even through silence, someone might still be listening. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more real-life inspired stories that warm your soul, make you feel deeply, and maybe even make you cry just a little. Because sometimes, one knock on the wall is all it takes to be